Hi Ethan, first of all, thank you for making time for this. Of
course.
This is like the Cosmos Hub video series that we're doing. 3 or 4 days we'll be shooting. A lot of folks, a lot of builders in this space and getting their thoughts on Cosmos Hub and what they're working on. Do you want to start with like a quick introduction and what do you do?
What do I do? I'm just some guy. So, started this whole thing so many years ago and still working on it through a number of different projects at Informal, our company. We've been leading development of Comet BFT, the consensus engine, of Hermes, the IBC relayer, doing a lot of work there. And of course, leading development of the Cosmos Hub as well. We shipped interchain security. Now we're working on Hydro, making the hub the best place to launch a chain and to access liquidity and other key services needed to build a sovereign L1 in the interchain.
So you have like every Cosmos, you present like a new vision for Cosmos. What is your overview so far of where Cosmos has come? What's in line for like the coming 6 to 12 months? Something that people who are like cosmonauts and people who are atom holders or something are can look forward to in terms of new milestone that might come.
Yeah, I think the vision's been pretty consistent. The main thing the last few years has been really cleaning up the tech stack, making it easier to use, easier to launch. And especially now, the focus is on making it easier to access liquidity, right? And with so many chains, and the ecosystem is struggling from a liquidity perspective, and so we really need to focus on that. And there's still a lot to make it easy to build sovereign L1s, to build Cosmos chains, and to interconnect them. And so, there's the Cosmos SDK v2 that's coming out. There's IBC Eureka, so a number of things that just make it a lot easier, focused on developer experience to connect chains together, to stand them up. Of course, there's permissionless ICS on the Cosmos Hub now, so it's easier than ever to launch a chain, to get a validator set, and with Hydro coming, making it easier to access liquidity, to bid for liquidity, and so really just continuing on the same vision of sovereign interoperable blockchains and Internet of Blockchains, and bringing that all to life, but really focusing now on making it as easy as possible for devs to build in that environment and to connect. And so much of what we built originally was about bringing the interchain to life. Now that it's here, we need to build for its growth, and that requires a whole new set of tools and approaches and teams and so on. So
you of course travel a lot, meet folks from tons of different ecosystems. What do you think is one thing that makes not just developers but people who want to build things in the space, founders, creators, be attracted to Cosmos?
Yeah, I think the main thing is those core values of sovereignty and interoperability that have been steadfast about from the beginning. Cosmos as an ecosystem really belongs to everyone, right? It's not about the founders, not about the core teams, not about any single blockchain. It's really about the whole ecosystem. And so I think people have always really felt that Cosmos is theirs as well, and that they can make it their own. And that I think is very attractive. A lot of developers are really attracted to sovereignty. They want to be able to have control over the whole stack. They want to be able to build the best possible features, the best UX, and so on. And that really requires control and vertical integration. And the Cosmos stack and the Cosmos philosophy has really enabled that. And so, there's still a lot of work to do, still very competitive, ecosystem out there, but, we're still on the same track and continuing to adapt and evolve to the needs of the growing interchain. So we think that's the main thing, yeah.
Of course, everyone we have interviewed so far talks highly of IBC, how it's something that's definitely stands apart among all these other, blockchain universes, let's just call it that. And what do you think about the vision for IBC beyond Cosmos in terms of multi-chain or cross-chain partnerships, and what's your vision for that?
Yes, the ideal of IBC was always to be more than just Cosmos. It's an inter-blockchain communication protocol for any blockchain. I think the reality is we've seen some work integrating it with other chains, but a decent amount of complexity in the original IBC protocol that makes it hard or expensive to integrate into certain blockchains. And so the drive behind IBC Eureka, which is this updated version, simplified version of the IBC protocol, is really about making it easier to integrate, reducing the development costs, reducing the integration costs, so that you can get IBC up and running on other chains, Solana, Ethereum, Near Protocol, Polkadot. Some of those have already, built solutions to integrate with the existing IBC, but with IBC Eureka, we want to make it really easy so that, the entire rollup space can also use it. And there's all this fragmentation between ETH-L2s, between, rollups, thinking about how they're going to communicate, even Celestia rollups. How do we communicate with the Celestia chain? How do we communicate with each other? And, everyone wants to be able to use something like IBC, free, permissionless, open, very rigorous and high quality standard. standard, but the original design had maybe a little bit too much complexity baked in. And so, IBC Eureka is really about simplifying that, making it easier for everyone to connect and integrate.
Yeah, I mean, big time fan. Like, I'm just like, as soon as I started checking like map of zones for the first time, like just the visual is such a.
You see the birth of a new kind of internet,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
it's
and it's growing. Like you
Yeah.
can see over 4 years, like we're at like 91 zones so far.
Something
These are
like
map of
that,
zones.
yeah. And I think a lot of people still think it's just a bridge, right? It's like, oh, it's just for token transfer, but IBC is so much more than that. It's so much more general than that. It's a general purpose communication protocol for arbitrary machines, right? And so you can do more than just transfer tokens. You can, transfer validator sets. You can control accounts over IBC. You can do, pretty much arbitrary kinds of computation, essentially. And so that's very powerful. And we're starting to see that be explored and chains really build kind of direct relationships with each other, doing more than token bridging. But I think once we start having more simplicity in the protocol and it's easier to integrate with Ethereum and other kinds of other ecosystems, we'll start to see a lot more developer activity and different kinds of applications being built. So I think that's very exciting.
So next question is about interchain security. So basically, as Cosmos grows, and there is of course more and more chains that are interested in using this, do you see it having basically application beyond just Cosmos, with Ethereum or other blockchain hubs? Like this will be something that they'll also find viable and a very no-brainer solution to that.
Yeah, I think they already do. I mean, you can think about interchain security as a kind of restaking, essentially, and restaking is a pretty hot narrative across Ethereum for sure, and maybe some others. But the Cosmos Hub was basically a pioneer in that regard. It built, the first version of ICS at a very specific and simplified approach where the entire validator set had to be inherited, and really the goal with that was to provide a way to expand the functionality of the Cosmos Hub itself, right? So with a philosophy of keeping the hub minimal so that it wouldn't be, not to increase the service area or the risk of attacks, but then allow it to expand its development and add new features by adding consumer chains, right? And one major idea or approach would have been to have a consumer chain for each kind of virtual machine, right? So one for Cosm Wasm, one for the EVM, one for whatever, Solana VM, and so on, and have those be anchors for the rest of the ecosystem of sovereign L1s using them. That's not quite how things develop. Maybe the politics of the Cosmos Hub have been kind of complicated, and so we've pushed ICS to become permissionless now. So that launched pretty recently. So now we had the first permissionless ICS chain launch just last week. That's the Dungeon chain. And so now you can stand up a chain using validators from the Cosmos Hub without having to go through governance or any of that, and just stand up your chain and make a transaction and go for it. So ICS is now, Cosmos Hub is continuing to innovate on ICS. We have a lot of ideas for how we can go further and add more kinds of features and more general kinds of ways of basically restaking your Atom and putting the Atom and the validator set, even without staked Atom, potentially enabling proof of authority kinds of chains are very interesting. And so getting a validator set is a major part, putting up a chain. It's not the only part, right? So if the Cosmos Hub wants to be the best place to launch a chain, it needs to solve that, but it also needs to solve other elements as well. And so ICS is really the foundation for building a set of services that enable the hub to really lift all boats essentially in the interchain and continue to grow the interchain.
Yeah, we had just had Dean also mentioned something and he said that basically what's very unique about Cosmos is how launching a chain is becoming a Thursday. It's so uncomplicated, and that's why our job right now is just to bring more and more people to it.
Yeah.
That's what you're basically summarizing here.
Yeah.
Hydro is something that people are excited about, especially Cosmos Hub and Atom Accelerator DAO. There's so much momentum for it. The whole bidding liquidity and governance mechanism. What are your expectations about its adoption? What do you think? Which sector do you think will pick up first for it, and adoption wise,
Yeah, I think Hydra is very exciting. I think it's something very much needed by the space. There's a lot of capital tied up in community pools. There's still a lot to be wanted from decentralized liquidity management. And Hydro is an approach to starting to solve that, allowing community pools from the Cosmos Hub or potentially even from other blockchains to export their liquidity in a more market-based and formal way, where you're really attending to the rewards that are being paid for that, or the tributes as we call them in Hydro, and sort of managing it more actively and intelligently. So there does seem to be a lot of excitement about that as a way to really bring more liquidity to across the interchain and sort of unlock these idle community pools. And there's already some tributes coming in from some projects that are kind of ready to go with Hydro. The launch of Hydro has been a little bit delayed due to certain factors and security concerns about one of the modules that Hydro depends on that have come to light. But our team is actively working on addressing that and finding alternatives to make Hydro really an amazing experience. And we'll start with just like a pilot launch, right? Just start small and test things out, make sure there's an opportunity to get feedback in. But ultimately, especially once we add some more functionality to allow the bid duration to be longer. Right now with Hydro, projects can bid a staked atom that lock up in Hydro, can then vote, on where they want the liquidity to be exported, and then there's a time span where it's paid back, where the liquidity is paid back essentially, right? And so right now for the pilot rounds, that's only 1 month. That's enough to get things started, but that's very short for larger projects that want to lock up, that want to have guaranteed access to liquidity for longer, maybe 6 months or something, or even. And so we'll be adding those kinds of features to make it a lot more appealing for chains to actually bid for that kind of liquidity. And then it's another option for major projects, AMMs and lending protocols and DEXs and so on to get access to liquidity from a let's say an aligned and decentralized source.
Sounds pretty exciting though, to be honest.
Yeah.
Is there plans to expand Hydro's basically accept tokens that can be used beyond just Atom?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a concept of buckets in Hydro, and right now it's an Atom bucket from the Cosmos Hub community pool. But the idea is to enable buckets of other tokens. So for instance, on Neutron, the Cosmos Hub has a bunch of Neutron in its community pool, so we can make a Neutron bucket and have those Neutron only be able to be exported to projects on the Neutron blockchain where they need liquidity, or we could have a TIA bucket for and have it really only exported to rollups, right? So we can. I mean, if projects want their liquidity exported anywhere, then Hydro can enable that. If they only want it exported in particular domains, Hydro can enable that as well. But the goal is definitely to support exports of other tokens and to really make it sort of a general purpose liquidity platform and have that be really a core offering of the Cosmos Hub, right? Bringing liquidity to the rest of the interchain.
So there's just a bunch of rapid fire questions that I wanted to run by you, of course. What is your favorite interchain wallet?
My favorite interchain wallet?
Yeah.
Well, I guess Keplr.
Okay. So I've got 3 for 3 so far. What was your first
Can I say Prax? I don't know if that counts as an interchain wallet. That's the new Penumbra wallet. But
okay.
I'm pretty stoked about privacy and about the privacy chains launching, and it's annoying that we have to make a new extension, a new wallet each time, but these guys are really pushing the boundary on what we can do client side, and really empowering users to have full control and privacy over their data and transactions. It's maybe a little bit jarring at first to wrestle with that, not being able to see all the data on chain and stuff, but doing everything client side is super important, and we want to see more of that, and the Penumbra team has done great works with Prax extensions, so it's worth checking out. Yeah.
What do you think is the next challenge that Cosmos sort of needs to tackle for basically growing even faster?
Yeah, it's probably liquidity, bringing liquidity back into the ecosystem.
About ICS, do you think it's in the coming 1 or 2 years, it's really gonna be the backbone of a lot of new projects that will be launched? What's your take on that?
I think if the hub can provide so again, there's more to launching a chain than just getting a validator set or just getting security. And so the hub needs to be able to provide those additional services. But I think ICS can be a foundation for bringing those additional services. And that's kind of always been the goal. Start with ICS, expand the functionality of the hub, and then be able to add additional services on top, right? And Hydro is an example of that, right? Neutron gave the hub a permissionless CosmWasm environment. So Hydro and a whole DeFi ecosystem can be built around it to allow the hub to then be a platform for liquidity exports. And I think there's bridging that's required. There's other kind of shared standards and services, stablecoins, and asset issuance, and all these kinds of things. And the hub can be a platform providing that. So I think we will see some amount of consolidation under a common banner. I mean, as much as sovereignty is like a superpower, it can also lead to fragmentation and some level of political infighting and so on. So I think there's an opportunity to sort of reunite a little bit under the Cosmos Hub and its ICS offering or other potential alignment offerings, let's say. And I think that will be very powerful for the interchain ecosystem.
If you were to describe ICS in one word, what would it be? Other than security, of course.
Best place to launch a chain.
Okay, okay.
You need one word? I don't know. Alliance.
Okay, that's a good one. Your go-to sort of like dApps or tools in Cosmos that you're like, just like you absolutely love and you use them a lot. Like.
Well, I mean, I'm checking out MintScan all the time and using my Kepler wallet. I've lately found myself developing some CosmWasm stuff, so that's been fun. We're building a few things. I mean, Hydro obviously is one, and Cycle's team, which I'm leading, is building some interesting stuff in CosmWasm that we'll likely be announcing this week. So looking forward to that. So yeah.
And what's your most like memorable memory that like gave you the Cosmos feeling?
Probably, I mean, there's been a few. I think the Cosmos Hub launch, that moment of seeing blocks getting made. I think built the first time I built a few years ago, like before even Osmosis Live, I built like a DEX demo and launched the chain like myself, and then connected it over IBC and then moved tokens, and that was like, wow, this is coming, it's going to be real. And then once Osmosis launched and you were actually moving like real value and over these rails between chains, that so now every time I use it, it's kind of surreal. Every time I move funds over IBC, it's like, it's hard to believe it's all that it's happening. But yeah, and then whenever I look at like Mappa Zones, like we were saying earlier, it's just like, yeah, I can't. It's a new interchain that we gave birth to, and that is growing.
It's like that Michael Fassbender moment, like perfection. Like,
yeah.
Where he says, that's about it. I mean, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have like a catchphrase that you want to give, like if you wanted to say something for Cosmos, like the community or the hub at large?
Cosmos, sovereignty, interoperability. We're gonna keep going. Yeah.
That's great. That's
amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.